Often when people hear my field, they say, kind of scoffing, ugh, I will sleep when I'm dead. I love to have a 5-hour night because I have so many more hours in the day. But I think, well, you're going to be dead faster.
Hello, everybody. Welcome to Behind Their Success podcast. I'm Peyton Squires, the host, and today we have on Catherine Darley, Dr. Catherine Darley. Her expertise is in natural sleep medicine. Over the last 20 years, she has helped patients one-on-one, taught corporate audiences, and trained other medical professionals. More recently, she has created a series of online courses customized for different lifestyles to learn how to sleep. Dr. Catherine Darley, welcome on Behind Their Success.
Thank you. So glad to be here.
Yeah, Catherine. So sleep, obviously, that's a big topic. Tell us a little bit about what you do.
Well, I love sleep because it's universal. Everybody has their own experience, their own sleep story. And I just love to help people with such a foundational piece. What I do is I work with individual patients one-on-one on sleep disorders. But when I've been doing that, what I've realized is that there's just a lot of misconceptions about sleep. And, it's one of those things that is universal, but yet we don't learn about systematically. It's not something that's covered in high school health classes. It's not covered with our doctors. Usually doctors will not ask about sleep. Fortunately, it seems like is changing, but over the last 20 years of being in this field, that's been the reality.
Yeah. So, you say there's some kind of common misconceptions. Obviously, as entrepreneurs, high performers, whatnot, sleep is unbelievably important, right? And getting in rhythms and stuff there. What are some of the common misconceptions you kind of see around sleep just out there in the health industry?
Well, you mentioned entrepreneurs. When I've gone and participated in business networking groups, often when people hear my field, they say, kind of scoffing, ugh, I will sleep when I'm dead. I love to have a 5-hour night because I have so many more hours in the day. And of course, I don't say it to people in the moment, but I think, well, you're going to be dead faster. And that's actually the data shows is that short
Sure.
sleepers do have a shorter lifespan. The thing is really, do you want to go through your life at the top of your game, cognitively snappy, energetic, even keel energy rather than energy that peaks and then crashes? Do you want to have strong physical performance in terms of a quick reaction time, good balance, all of those things? If you do, then sleep is part of that formula. And we know absolutely that when people are sleep deprived, which over a third of us are sleep deprived chronically, our performance is going to suffer.
Oh yeah, certainly. I can tell when I don't get the proper amount of sleep, and the next day is always a struggle, right? Or at least, you're at least not running anywhere near 100%, right? You can feel that kind of brain fog and moving a little slow. What are some just practical tips around improving some sleep, or some practical tips maybe some of the listeners can take away that you see as common problems?
That's a all day question.
Yeah, I'm sure you know.
I should say that could take all day. So everybody get cozy because we're going to be here for another 7 hours. So the top ones, I think about us taking care of our sleep in 3 ways. Quantity, are we getting enough sleep? Quality, is it undisturbed both by things in our environment or internal things like a sleep disorder? And then the third piece is timing. So you want to think about your sleep in those 3 ways. Quantity, adults need somewhere between 7 to 9 hours of sleep. And think about it like a bell curve. I'm at the 50th percentile for women my age in terms of height. And, that's not something that I choose. It's not something that I can really do anything about. I'm as tall as I was given the genetic code for. And the same thing with sleep. If you are someone who needs 9 hours, it's not because of a personal failing or you're not trying hard enough or anything like that. It's just your set point. So lots of people, about a third of people, are getting only 6 hours a night. That's not enough. That's probably enough for about 4% of us, but the other 96% of us, we need 7 to 9. So a great strategy is first for people to figure out, how much sleep do I do best with? One tip: if you are waking up with an alarm clock or someone's waking you, that's not enough sleep. You're truncating your sleep. So don't do that to yourself. Figure out how much sleep you do best with. If you are waking up with an alarm and you suspect that you are chronically sleep deprived, and sometimes people don't really know how much sleep they do best with, you could do what I call the 10 by 10 test. That is spending 10 hours in bed a night for 10 days in a row. It allows you to catch up on any chronic sleep debt and kind of figure out, okay, going forward, how much sleep do I need? And then you can start scheduling that into your lifestyle.
Yeah, that's interesting. I guess I heard out there in the world or the internet or whatever that, yeah, I mean, to some degree you can kind of catch up on sleep. Is that I guess true, or?
Not really. I mean, you've lost a day of your life. We have a certain number of days in our life, and you have lost that day
Yeah,
to
sure.
it being a good day, a healthy day. There's lots of not only performance implications of not getting enough sleep, but your physical health measurably declines just the following day of not getting enough rest.
And I've kind of tracked sleep and stuff to some degree of my life, kind of over the years, just having like a Fitbit tracker, so you can kind of get some decent data on, your sleep quality, the amount of sleep. Do you recommend anything like that, or what's kind of your recommendations around that, trying to measure it as a bracket?
Yeah, that's kind of a sticky subject because all the different wearables are not 100% accurate. And so then there's problems of people basing their judgment or their actions on data that's not 100% accurate. And they are getting better. The other concern that I have is that we see people getting hyper focused, and it actually increases their worry and their vigilance around their sleep. And sleep is hard to do when you're being hyper vigilant. So sometimes we see it contributing to the problem. So a great recommendation with the Fitbit or any kind of sleep tracker is to keep it for a week or 10 days at first. And then, have like, okay, I'm not getting enough hours, or my sleep seems disturbed by external influences. Then do a little period, maybe 2 or 3 weeks, where you're really working your strategy, but you're not hyper focused on the outcome. And then do another spot check of maybe 4 nights where you have 2 nights that you're on your work schedule, 2 nights when you're off, and see, okay, what gains did I make? And what's the next growth curve? That is a better way to do it.
Yeah, that's great advice. I think, having a ton of data around sleep or just anything, right? People can get too lost in the data and not focus on the big picture. They're like measuring too often, right? Measuring too often,
exactly.
not seeing the gains, right? That I could see that as a problem.
Are you looking for a new tax experience? Looking for an advisor that actually brings you high-level ideas and proactively plans so you aren't overpaying your taxes? Or how about one that even just responds and communicates in a timely fashion? If any of that resonates with you, you probably just have a tax preparer and not a tax planner. And it is through the tax planning process where all the value is found. And when tax planning is done right, it has a positive return on investment. I'm Peyton Squires. I'm a CPA and owner of Squires Tax Planning. We work alongside entrepreneurs and high-income earners, helping them pay the least amount of income taxes, both legally and ethically. We have saved our clients hundreds of thousands of dollars through specific strategies, and we guarantee we can find multiple tax strategies that your current tax preparer hasn't told you about. If that interests you, head over to squirestaxplanning.com. There you can take our free assessment to see how likely it is that you are overpaying on your income taxes. From there, you can also book a free tax discovery call with our team to see what it would look like to have us working for you.
Well, Catherine, just kind of turning the conversation to you a little bit. Give us a little bit about your background and kind of where you came from and how you became a sleep expert.
Yeah, so I got interested in sleep when I was in college, actually, and did some personal, group projects, individual projects on sleep. And one of those projects, we had to interview a living scientist. And so I reached out to one of the scientists who most of my research papers that I was reading, referencing, who had done, and had this great conversation. And for graduation of undergrad, I asked my parents to send me as a graduation gift to the sleep meeting, the national sleep meeting. It was in Hollywood that year. And I got to meet my sleep hero. Woo! So that was awesome. And then a couple months later, she called me and said, "Hey, would you want to come work as a research assistant and technologist in my research center?" And I literally, it was one of those phone calls. You hang up the phone and then you jump up and down and
Yeah,
scream.
so excited.
I think this is maybe the only time in my life I ever had a phone call that I responded like that. But yeah, so I worked as a sleep research tech. And then I was thinking at that time, I want to go on to graduate school. And, do I want to be a medical doctor? Do I want to be a researcher, psychologist, And being from Seattle, I was familiar with the field of naturopathic medicine. And I had this epiphany one day that I will approach sleep from the naturopathic viewpoint. And naturopathic medicine, we really try to treat the root cause of the problem, not just mask with symptom treatment.
Yeah.
And we also try really to do what we call the least force medicine. That means for insomnia, for instance, we're going to do behavioral and lifestyle type treatments first before we do those pharmaceuticals that can have negative side effects. So we have a therapeutic order, we call it, where we go from diet and exercise and herbs and light to medicines and surgery and chemotherapy and
I kind of like less intervention the better. And I obviously not as wise as you in these areas, but you see that like less intervention a lot of times, like pharmaceutical or physical intervention, is actually a better long-term outcome.
Right. Yeah. So that's my stance. And a lot of naturopathic medicine also is based on the principle of docere. Docere is a word that means teacher. Doctor is a derivative of docere. And so we really try to go back to that, teaching people how to take good care of themselves so that they're empowered. Right. It's not very empowering when you just have to go to the pharmacist and get your drugs, and an insurance company is telling you how much those drugs are going to cost or whether they're even accessible. It's much more empowering when you know, okay, if I get light in this way in the morning, if I get darkness in this way in the evening, I'm going to sleep better, and I can create that environment for myself.
Yeah, and that's such great advice, and that's not just limited to obviously sleep. I mean, that's really every area of your life is taking control of what you can take control of, because we don't have control of most things, but the few things we do, we need to take control of, right?
Exactly.
So, what would you say has been the most impactful decision you've made? You started in the research center, you were still looking at what path you wanted to go on. What would you credit as your best decision on that path?
I think that the best decision that I made is to follow my interests, follow my heart around my career. I love my work. I absolutely love my work. There's times that I've thought, well, if I didn't love my work so much, I'd probably make more money because I just want to spend my time doing something that I think is interesting and I'm good at and I think is valuable. I really believe in sleep medicine and the positive impact that it can have on people. So that gives meaning to my day every day. And, being self-employed, being an entrepreneur is not always easy, but it becomes easy when I think, okay, what would I enjoy doing today? Today, I would enjoy working with sleep medicine and helping people.
And once again, you get that choice, right? It's your choice to work on what you want, and when you're working on something that you're good at, you spend a lot of time in, you're interested in, you have this lot of knowledge. It feels good too, right? You're
Yeah.
doing it, right? Like it's this positive feedback loop of, hey, I've kind of become an expert in this. Hey, I really enjoy doing it, and it's amazing how, like, I always kind of say, you don't find your passion, you really develop it. And you develop it by working really hard at something, like, diving into sleep and everything you dive into. And you start getting better at it. And it's amazing how that becomes your passion, because now you're good at it and you love it and that kind of thing. So it's not like most people, when they first discover something, they're not passionate about it because they're not very good at it yet.
Right. It gets to be this feedback loop.
Yeah. So another question here for you, Catherine. How would you define success kind of in your career, entrepreneurship, kind of from where you're at now? How would you define success? And then maybe secondary to that is, how has maybe that changed a little bit over your career? Or is it still...
Yeah, I would say how I define success. I think spending your life on things that you value, your life being the hours of your day and the days of your week. And I think also having a positive impact and, having enough income that you can be at ease financially and, enjoy your days and have time off. Definitely having time off is something that Americans struggle with. We have the least amount of time off of most countries in the world, I think. And, rest and time off and sleep kind of are a continuum, right? So having enough financial success that you're able to have time to rest and have peace of mind while you're doing so. I think about rest versus collapse. Those are two very different things.
And, what you're talking about there, I'm sure, in the entrepreneur space, you are fighting probably the American culture a little bit, right? As in, so much of a grind and hustle and all these things. And I'm very much, in that kind of space. I certainly value hard work. I'm starting to really understand that hard work is not obviously the whole picture, right? You need to work smart and then also be strategic, right? And it's the, I'll never sleep till I'm dead or whatever, that you don't understand how much efficiency you're losing by having that attitude, right? You think, I'm just going to grind this out, work way harder than everybody, but you're doing a way worse job because you're not taking those strategic restful periods or taking care of your sleep, that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I'd like to tag on to that with a common, it is a common misperception that the more hours we spend on work, the better we do. We know from the work efficiency data, after 8 hours, your performance is tanking, and you're getting, like, in that 9th hour, you're getting 10% done that you got in the first hour.
Yep.
And along those lines, there's actually brain changes and perception changes with sleep deprivation, that if you take someone who's well rested, then you sleep deprive them a little bit from, 8 hours to 6 hours for 3 days. The first day they say, I can tell I'm not doing as well after one night of sleep deprivation. The second day, after the second night, they say, yeah, my performance is not as good. The third day, they go, wow, I think that I adjusted. I got used to this sleep deprivation. Their performance is still going down, but somehow their mind has shifted to this new normal. I know we're all sick of that phrase, but we have. And so really the amount that you're impaired when you're sleep deprived is equal to being drunk. So just think, okay, 3 nights of sleep deprivation, that third day I'm showing up with the performance of someone who's drunk. Is that going to do well for you? Probably not long term.
Yeah, it is amazing how quickly our body, or I say more importantly, our minds adjust to that, to just kind of trick ourselves into believing that, because objectively in our own minds, our perceptions are like, yeah, everything's fine.
Right.
But you don't realize how slowly that your performance is slipping there.
Yeah. So the research shows that if you look at someone who's on that shorter sleep, 5 nights a week, longer sleep for 2 nights, if you track them for 6 weeks on that schedule, week by week, performance just keeps going down, measurable performance. And that's well established.
Well, it's funny. So, I'm a CPA by trade and a tax guy, and tax season is always this big monster, right? And for years, I was a guy that would operate on, I don't know, 6.5 hours of sleep, maybe. And a guy that I'd get up at 3:45, be at the gym, be at work by 5 a.m. Because I had terribly designed my business that I literally needed to work that much to keep everything running, which was stupid in my own right. But what's amazing is I've changed a lot of stuff. I've changed my business a lot for where it's not necessarily the pure amount of hours I got to work. And now when I'm in meetings and we're kind of in the heat of tax season right now recording this, and people can tell I show up different. I show up with way more energy. The stress level is way down. And, my performance, I'm sure, people, if we could somehow objectively measure that or rate that, is probably off the charts as compared to what, it has been the last few years.
That's awesome. That's awesome. What kind of motivated you, or what was the tipping point of making those changes?
That's a great question. I think it was just getting wiser to realize that, I'm your typical American culture grind, hard work, you're Puritan, that whole culture.
Uh-huh.
I get my value from how hard I work, right? Which is obviously not a great idea. But I think it's just making the shift in really my entrepreneurial journey from being like, I would say, less of the fighter, the warrior, like the guy in the middle of the fight day to day, to being more of like the leader. And I use the analogy of like the king, right? The king kind of sits back here and makes the decisions and moves the chess pieces around. It's really making that transition from the operator, the guy in the middle of it, to really, I get paid to make decisions, right? And that's how I get paid, is to move the pieces around and make decisions. And that has allowed me to alter my identity to some degree and detach from hard work. So it's been a journey, and and I'm sure there's a lot of listeners that makes them feel kind of weird, or like rest just in general makes them uncomfortable because they're already, high anxiety, high wired to like just get stuff done. And it's very hard for people like that, or in me, I'm totally in that box, to be okay not producing something in the moment.
Yeah. I think about, the old sharpen the saw, right?
Yeah.
Sleep and rest is a way that we sharpen the saw and we come back. And sometimes I think data can actually help us overcome kind of some cultural training, that the data shows people who get those 7 to 9 hours of sleep, they do better in life. They do better with their performance. They do better with relationships and emotional intelligence. They do better with their longevity. They do better with their health. There's an issue in medicine, kind of a new phrase of health span. We've all familiar with the term longevity or lifespan, that we want to have a good long lifespan, but we also want our health span to equal our lifespan. You don't want to grind, and then, yeah, you're retired, but you're sick and you can't do those things that you work so hard to be able to do later in life. And sleep is definitely one of those principles. And, when people are challenging their way of doing things or conceptions of stuff, I really like for people to do an experiment, just frame it as an experiment. Like, if I get all the sleep that I need for 10 days, how much is that? But also, how does it impact my life? do I actually feel better? Do I feel like I don't have to have 3 energy drinks during the day to spike my blood pressure and
Yeah.
blood sugar and
Yeah.
all
And
that?
then crash off that later. Yeah.
Right. Yeah. And how does it affect my relationships? I think getting along with people can be hard sometimes, but yet we want to get along well. We want to have good relationships with people. If I come into work or come home and I'm sleep deprived, I'm not going to be able to tell Peyton if my partner is happy or angry. If I walk in the door, that is information that is going to be useful
Yeah.
for me, for our relationship. But just even having that empathy with others deteriorates measurably when we're sleep deprived. So, for anyone who's having some conflict at home, in the workplace, think about, is it the sleep deprivation that's making me insensitive, basically? And there's lots of different ways I could, talk about emotional intelligence and how it deteriorates with deprivation.
Yeah, and I can 100% my experience that, right? You're tired, you're just super irritable, everything's annoying. And if I walk in the door, I got a spouse and 3 kids there. And as a dad, what kind of dad are you going to show up as, right? And if you're going to be that tired person, I'm no fun to be around. And why would you want to be
Right.
around, right? So it's just important, right? Yeah, just to realize that you aren't, sacrificing your sleep is not getting you closer to your goals. And in many ways, it's getting you much further away from
Absolutely. Absolutely. And we want to be using the tools at our disposal really sensibly. And one of those tools is sleep. I mentioned the sleep quantity, which we talked about a lot, sleep quality. And this is where I put in both those internal drivers of, do we have a sleep disorder, and external, is there something in our environment waking us up? I would like to do a PSA that there are about 60 sleep disorders. And I know some of your listeners today are already on board. They're using their sleep tracker, their wearable, they're doing all the things. They're listening to some podcasts about sleep. They're taking some of those action steps. If you are taking the action steps that you've learned and you're not getting traction with your sleep, you could have an undiagnosed sleep disorder. We think sleep disorders affect somewhere between 15 to 20, maybe up to 30% of us, and they are largely undiagnosed. The big one being obstructive sleep apnea, insomnia, restless leg syndrome, but there are many others. And so this is an area that we don't want to think it's all on us. It's only our lifestyle choices. That's not true. You could have this disorder that needs to be, first of all, accurately diagnosed and then accurately treated by a trained healthcare professional. So do consider that, because I do hear from people, oh my goodness, I've been doing all of the things for 6 weeks, 8 weeks, and I just know that they are being so diligent following the recommendations, but they're just not getting there. And in that case, go see a doctor.
Yeah. That's some great advice. There could be something there that you just don't, you don't even realize is there that's stopping you from it. Yeah. I love the analogy earlier you used about sharpening the saw, right? And that's interesting, and years ago, over the last few years, when I was just killing myself in tax season, I'm sure I'm swinging a heck of a dull axe, and not very far. Where if I would have just taken a little bit of time sharpening that, my actions would have been a whole lot more effective instead of just beating my head against the wall. I'm not sleeping.
Right. Exactly.
So it's been a great conversation, Catherine. What's the best way people can kind of connect with you or get to know more about you and your expertise around sleep?
Yeah. So I'm on social media, Instagram, etc., at Skilled Sleeper. That's my handle. And I have a weekly newsletter called Be a Skilled Sleeper on Substack. So if you want to either look at the webpage or you could sign up, that comes out once a week and really goes into a topic and then always what to do around that. I'm very much about giving people the information, the sleep skills that they need to be empowered to do what they need to do from their end to get the sleep that they need. So those are some free services, and then you can check out skilledsleeper.com. I created a couple of years ago, or last year, I did a deep dive and created some online sleep courses that are customized to unique populations. And this is going to be different because other sleep courses you might find are kind of generalized. These are very specific. I've got one for women's sleep because women throughout the lifespan have more sleep complaints than men do. I've got one that's specifically for shift workers, which is about 20% of us. And absolutely, there's challenges there that need help. I've got one for first responders. So you'll see there's several that I really do a deep dive and target the recommendations for that population. There's one for corporate. So check those out and see if that's going to serve your needs.
Yeah, that's amazing, guys. I check some of Catherine's stuff out at Skilled Sleeper. If you have any issues in that area, and like, let's say maybe you don't even have outstanding issues, but like there's always ways to better your environment, better the decisions you're kind of making to increase that quality and stuff. Catherine, is there anything else you want to kind of leave the listeners for the show?
One tip, all these recommendations you hear about light and dark, absolutely follow them. In the morning, we need to get as much outside light and bright light as possible. And it's actually for 3 hours before bed is the recommendation. I know that is very difficult or impossible, but for at least an hour or two, purposely dim the lights, maybe wear blue blocking glasses if you need to be on screens or have the lights bright, but really try to replicate sunset hues because that helps your body know that night is approaching and it's time to switch into nighttime physiology. So I'll leave that last little tip and teaser out there for people.
Yeah, that's great advice. I think, man's quality of sleep has probably dropped dramatically in the last 100 years or whatever with technology.
Absolutely.
Too much light, right, at nighttime.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, Catherine, I appreciate you so much for coming on the show. And listeners, we will catch you next time.
Thank you so much for listening to the podcast. If you found it valuable, please rate, review, and share it. That is the best way to help us build this and reach more people, as we're trying to accomplish our goal of help creating more healthy, wealthy, and wise entrepreneurs. You can follow us on social media by searching for me, Peyton Squires, or going to PeytonSquires.com. On the website and social media, we're always sharing tips of personal growth, and there we can actually interact. I'm looking forward to it. Thanks, guys.